Uber was suffering from sexual harassment.
Right.
Google had a number of issues. They lack integrity.
Google, they're known for the ethos, the don't be evil, and they award it as a great place to work.
You need more than just a slogan. You need leaders to actually not just speak the language, but actually follow what they speak. I said to everyone, here are 10 examples of leaders who have been caught in sexual harassment scandals, lost their job, hurt the brand. We don't want anything like that here. None of us in this room will engage in any romantic relationship of any kind.
CROSS DIG 101始まります。今日のテーマはなぜ会社で不正が起こるのかです。毎年のようにいろんな不正が報じられてますけれども、どうしたらいい会社になれるのか、そんなことを考えさせられる本が先日発売されたんですけれども、こちらですね。題して組織は倫理をないがしろにするという本なんですけども、売上を伸ばすためならちょっとぐらいズルしてもいい、そんな小さなことだと思ってもそれが大きな不正につながったりするわけです。著者は民泊仲介サイトのエアビー&ビーで最高倫理責任者チーフエシックスオフィサーを務めた方です。急成長するテック業界でさまざまな問題を目の当たりにしてそこで得た教訓がびっしりと書かれています。今日は著者のロバート・チェスナットさんをお招きしていい会社悪い会社とは何かを深掘りしていきます。So we have a special guest in the studio, Robert Chesnut. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So we're going to take a deep dive on what makes companies go wrong. But before that, I want to ask you about what you did as a chief ethics officer at Airbnb. So a lot of us know about Airbnb. I've, of course, spent some time at one of the listings on Airbnb when I travel. But there are a lot of jobs called chief something officer. But what was a chief ethics officer?
I think we thought it would be valuable to have one executive who was designated to be thinking about ethical issues all the time. So I was the general counsel when I was the chief ethics officer. I had both titles. But I think I was the sort of the focal point and the voice on the executive team. I was the one in the meetings that was designated to be always taking the ethical approach and making sure we were thinking about it whenever we were making decisions. It was also, I think, for the employees important to know that there was someone on the executive team that cared about this, and that if there were issues, you could go to HR, you could go to legal, but you could also, there was a member of the executive team that was a point person that they could look to for messaging and to raise problems.
How did you get the position from general counsel?
You know what? It started back in the Me Too era and Uber. Now, I don't know if you remember, but Uber was had a number of issues around sexual harassment.
Right.
There was an employee that did a blog post that really blew up the company.
Yeah.
And they're just down the street from Airbnb in San Francisco. And we were looking at what was going on there. And I know I went in to talk to Brian Chesky, and we agreed. I didn't want to be part of a company that was like that had those sorts of problems. But we also agreed that, what do you do proactively to prevent that kind of a problem? I didn't want to sit back and wait for something to blow up. I wanted to figure it out. And we didn't have any great answers that day. But we agreed that it ought to be something that deserved a deeper dive. So Brian looked at me and said, go big. And so part of going big was sort of taking on this mantle of being the chief ethics officer, taking on the responsibility of figuring it out.
Was there a chief ethics officer position at the other companies back then?
A few, but not many. I think Salesforce had one, for example.
Okay.
But most companies didn't have a chief ethics officer. I don't think it was something that a lot of companies specifically thought about. Some companies have since added chief ethics officer positions. I think it's possible to be ethical without a chief ethics officer. It's also possible to be unethical even if you've got one. So I don't think it's a critical role. What's critical is that you think about ethics and integrity, and you make some intentional efforts to drive it into your culture.
So as you wrote in the book, you've seen tons of incidents and allegations in a variety of companies and organizations, especially in the tech industry. So you wrote that what matters here is a concept called intentional integrity. That's actually the title of the book in English, Intentional Integrity. But a lot of our viewers are not really familiar with the concept in integrity itself. Yeah. So what is the integrity, or what's intentional integrity?
Well, I'll start with integrity. In integrity, this is hard. And one of the reasons I think a lot of people aren't familiar with it is it's not subject to a strict definition. It's not something that can be counted. Integrity is really this idea of having values, having a North Star, having some things that guide the way that you live as a human being. They will have to have something to do with right and wrong. For example, I won't lie, I won't cheat, I won't steal. They're things that, they're principles that I want to follow in the way that I live my life. And that can be the same for a company. A company can have values and things that it agrees that it's going to do that will guide its decisions. The challenge with integrity really is we don't always agree on what's right. Doing the right thing is integrity, but we can have different opinions about what is right or wrong in a particular circumstance. We all have different upbringings, values, culture, religion, and the like. Right. And so I could look at something and say that lacks integrity, and you might look at it and say that is fine, and that is have integrity, and we could both be right. But I do think that there are we all have a sense of doing good, doing right by others. And if you're acting selfishly, if you're just trying to get, to make the most money you can, or just make yourself look good, I think we can all agree that that sort of thing doesn't have integrity. There's an element of caring for others and doing good in this.
I hear a lot about do the right thing, like in the TV's drama, or in the movies, and all sorts of things. But yeah, I always wonder, what's the right thing?
What is the right thing? And I think for me, the important thing is you might not always agree on it as human beings, but it does matter to try to think about it and to try to do it, even if there may be some honest disagreement on it. When you go to this idea of intentional integrity, it sort of takes this thing a little bit further. You don't have integrity just naturally without thinking about it. We are all subject to temptation every day. We have this draw to do the thing that's in our self-interest. So that's just simply human. What keeps us from just doing everything that's in our self-interest is that notion of I have values, I've got principles. I won't do that even though it might be in my self-interest. You have to have an element of intentionality around it. In other words, you have to think about it. You have to tell yourself. And as a company, you have to make a statement about it. Leaders have to be willing to speak up and tell people in the company that we're going to do the right thing, and even talk a little bit about what it means. I think that silence is the enemy of integrity. Not talking about it is where problems occur. So I love an environment where it's a discussion and where you talk about what the right thing is and then you make a decision, but everyone recognizes that it's important.
Yeah, we're going to take deeper dive on what it means. So I have 3 points to talk today. And so first is what makes companies go wrong. And second thing is steps to do the right thing. So how we foster integrity in the company. And third thing is new responsibility in the AI era. Going on to the part 1, what makes companies go wrong. So the time you spent at Airbnb was pre-IPO and in the middle of rapid growth. So what were you going through at the time, and what was the most challenging incident that ended up making you realize the importance of ethics and integrity?
Well, it was a fast-growing company, and what kept us together, I think, leadership is at the heart of integrity. Because what I've learned is that leaders, integrity is contagious. In other words, we look around us for cues. We all want to think that we're a good person. We all think we have integrity. But we look around us, and if people around us aren't acting with integrity, it makes it a lot easier for us to do the same thing because we want to feel that we're as good as anyone else. But if they're doing it, hey, it must be okay. Integrity is contagious in that if people around you are acting with integrity, it forces you to step up a little bit and act with integrity as well. Leaders are the carriers. So the biggest influencers of integrity are the leaders of a company because everyone sees that the leader is the person who makes the decision about who's going to be successful. They set the tone. Brian Chesky was the founder at Airbnb. And what's interesting about Brian is Brian didn't go to business school. like most leaders. In fact, I think his first job ever was being the CEO of Airbnb when he started the company.
Right.
He went to design school, the Rhode Island School of Design, and his parents actually worked as a teacher and in nonprofits. So he looked at business a little bit differently. He looked at through a design eye, and he challenged, I think, all of us to define what the company was about, our North Star, our values, and then to make decisions consistent with that, which to me is really the heart of integrity. Airbnb's mission, what guided us every day, was connecting people. In other words, Airbnb existed because we wanted to get people out from behind the desk, get out in the world, see a different place, meet people who were different than we are, to connect with them. And we made decisions not based upon how much money it would make us, although that mattered and that was important. What really guided our decisions was, did it further our mission, right? And so that made it a little easier to operate with integrity, because I do think a lot of companies have problems with integrity because of financial pressure. They've got to hit a number, they've got to hit a target, and they'll do anything to hit that target. We never were run that way as a company. And I think that made it a little bit easier, even in a high growth environment with a lot of fast moving pieces. But what did really raise this to me was what was going on around us. This was the Me Too era. This was Uber. Google had a number of issues around the same time. And we didn't want to be like that, because we recognized how that hurts your business. And we really believe that if you operate with integrity and you follow a North Star, a good purpose, then you'll have fewer ethical problems and you'll ultimately be more successful as a business.
I think that after you left the company, Airbnb went public.
Yes.
And you talked about financial pressure to the company. When the company went public, the board has a fiduciary duty from shareholders, like to make companies to make more profit. So how would you do this, all of this, when the company is public?
It's interesting how you define capitalism, and there are a couple of different ways to look at it. You know, there's a Western view of capitalism that comes from Milton Friedman. It's called shareholder capitalism, and that is that idea that you just talked about. And that is, you have to do what's right for the shareholder, and that's all that matters. But that's not the only view of capitalism. There's actually a different way of thinking about capitalism. And actually, this was a view of capitalism that Japanese companies followed for decades before foreign investment came in, right? And this is called stakeholder capitalism.
Right. Stakeholder
capitalism still puts the investor at the center, but it recognizes that there are other important stakeholders that you need to be thinking about as well. You need to think about your employees. You need to think about your customers, for example. Think about your suppliers. And what we thought about and what we studied was that many of the great companies actually practice stakeholder capitalism. In other words, if you are only thinking about money, you get very short term in your thinking. Like, what are we doing this quarter to hit this number? And sometimes doing what's right to hit a quarterly number is actually the wrong thing for building a business in the long run. So when you go public, it's very important to set expectations with investors about how you're going to operate. Amazon, for example, did this very well. When Amazon went public, Amazon was very clear. If you're a short-term investor, don't buy our stock. Right? They said, we are going to be in this for the long haul. We're going to be doing things that will invest for growth over the long term, but maybe not in the short term. And so Airbnb, I think, learned from that example. And when Airbnb went public, they were very clear that we have stakeholders besides investors. We're going to think about employees. We're going to think about Airbnb hosts. We're going to think about Airbnb guests, for example. And I think putting investors on notice like that is really important, so that no one is surprised by the way that you're going to do things.
Right.
The good news is that when you think about these other stakeholders, the employees, the customers, and the like, you ultimately build a stronger financial business in the long run and ultimately do better for your shareholders than if you were very short-term in your focus. The problem, I think, is that too many companies get stuck in short-term thinking. And they think, well, we've got to do what's right for the investor. And my question to them is, which investor? The short-term investor or the long-term investor? And doing things right for the long-term investor means you think about others. I'll give you an example. One of the great companies, most successful companies of my lifetime is Costco.
Costco.
Okay, so
Right.
Costco, famous for treating its employees extremely well, paying its employees more than market wherever they do business, above market. Right? So some people might say, well, that's a waste of money. You should be focused on your investors and returning more money to investors, not to employees.
Right.
Costco's smarter than that. What Costco realizes is if you pay greater than market, there are a number of really positive, beneficial things that'll happen. The first thing is you get better people. You're going to attract more talent, right? The next thing is that as people are going to stay longer. There'll be less turnover, right? And then they're going to stay around longer. They're going to know your business, and they're going to be able to contribute more and ultimately grow into leadership positions, right? And what does all that mean? You're actually going to be more financially successful, right? So it depends on how you view capitalism. The way that Costco is operated, like Walmart's one of the most philanthropic companies in the world, almost one of the most successful. They understand that if you're smart about how you treat others, I think Adam Grant, famous business professor at Penn University, he talks about givers and takers in the world, right? A giver is someone who thinks about others, right? Empathetic, looking at other people's interests and helping them out. A taker is someone who's only thinking about themselves, always trying to get every dime for themselves, and they view the world as strictly you versus me. You know takers. We all know takers in our life, right? Adam Grant did a very interesting study. Who is more financially successful over the long run, a giver or a taker? And some people might say, oh, well, the taker would be, right? Because the taker is taking care of money. It's not true. Givers are in first and in last. Smart givers are people who help others, but they also take care of their own business, right? There are other givers who are always helping others, and that's all they're focused on all the time, so they don't get their own business done, and they finish at the bottom. Taker finishes in the middle. So if you want to be financially successful, the most financially successful, be a smart giver. Be like a Walmart, like a Costco, right? Treat others well, and what you find is that when you treat others well, the benefits come back to you and ultimately make you more successful.
But on the contrary, when I think about the tech companies that as I wrote in the book, Google, Meta, Uber, were criticized for how they handle their misconducts, like their executive sexual harassment or data privacy breach. So why were those companies not able to avoid those incidents? Were they growing too fast? Or?
They grew very quickly with leadership that was focused on the shareholder only. Right? And so they feel, a lot of times when you are making business decisions and you're thinking about ethics or integrity, the question is, can you rationalize what you're doing? How are you able to come up with an excuse for why what you're doing is okay? Very smart, very creative people are very good at coming up with rationalizations. So you talk yourself into it. And you talk yourself into it because it's going to work out in the short term, and that's all you're worried about in the moment. So I think, unfortunately, a number of these tech companies have operated that way. Great business models, and they've enjoyed a lot of financial success, but they've also, I think, missed a lot of opportunities to be even more successful because they've made decisions that were short-term focused, and they lack integrity.
What struck me the most in your book, the example in the book was Google. They're known for the ethos, the don't be evil. So I've always thought, Google is a good company and they awarded as a great place to work or something like that. But the Google paid a massive exit package to Andy Rubin, who's involved in sexual harassment. Or you wrote about
the general counsel, for example, David Drummond.
Chief legal officer. He had a relationship with the staff, and staff was forced to move to the other department after the company found out about their affair. So, but the statement like "don't be evil" doesn't work well enough to maintain integrity.
It takes more than a slogan.
Yeah.
Right, and I think. Too often slogans or posters put up on the wall, but it's not practiced, right? particularly damaging when it's a leader who doesn't follow it, right? Because if people see that sort of behavior going on with Rubin and with Drummond, for example, then the rest of the company looks at it and figures, well, if they can do it, it's okay. You need more than just a slogan. You need leaders to actually not just speak the language, but actually follow what they speak. And everybody watches the leaders. I like to say that leaders are the thermostat for a company. So like a thermometer, it takes the temperature of a room. Thermostat sets it. So by their words and their actions, leaders had to have a hand on the dial to create a climate that everyone in the company is living in. If the leaders are acting poorly, then the company is going to get off track from an integrity perspective.
Most of our viewers are either managers or even the individual contributors. So how do they act to hold the management accountable, or they ask for the better action?
Yeah, it's hard for someone lower to hold higher accountable, right? And that's why the leadership of a company is so important. I would love to tell you, I'd love to tell all the managers who may be watching this that you can change your company and you can make it ethical. I think that's a challenge because the leaders are the ones that set that tone. Now, what you can do is start with yourself, right? So how do you show up at work every day? How do you conduct yourself, right? And by doing that, hopefully you can start to influence those around you. And you can even start raising your hand a little bit and say, is this the right thing to do? But I also want to be realistic that if you work in a place that lacks integrity because the leadership lacks integrity, that should trouble you. And maybe you should find another place to work because it's going to be awfully tough to change directions.
I actually interviewed a person who led the employees' protest at Google back in 2018. Her name is Meredith Whitaker. She's the president of the private messaging app, Signal, right now, which is actually non-profit. So she chose a non-profit organization as the way to maintaining integrity in tech. Like she gave up on capitalism, like shareholder capitalism. So she thought she couldn't do the right thing at the public company, so she moved to the nonprofit. So what do you think about her move, and what do you think about nonprofit as a way?
I have seen unethical nonprofits.
Okay. Okay.
I think that what you do by moving to a nonprofit is you remove one source of ethical tension, and that is the money. It doesn't mean, however, that you're going to have a free ride ethically.
Okay, money is just one.
Money is just one
tension.
factor. And by the way, I've seen a number of companies operate ethically. There's an organization called Ethisphere. There are a number of business journals that have done studies that show that the more ethical companies actually outperform the stock market, and they outperform their peers. So it's possible to practice profitable capitalism, do it with integrity. And I've also seen leaders of nonprofits embezzling money from the nonprofit. I've seen them directing nonprofit funds to family members and friends. I've seen them engage in sexual harassment. So you remove one source of pressure, but you by no means avoid all of the ethical issues. Nonprofits need money too.
Right.
Nonprofits are constantly fundraising and they're looking around for money. So even nonprofits have financial pressures.
Right. Okay. So it's not a matter of the form of a corporation. It's a matter of the rules or the culture.
I think it's the culture and the leadership that have a lot to do with it.
Right.
I do think that modern capitalism does put pressures on companies. There are leaders at some of these companies who feel such pressure. They'll stomp around and they'll say, we're going to have to hit this number no matter what, because they're worried about the stock price, right? Or they feel like Boeing got in trouble because this plane, for competitive reasons, our stock's going to go down if this plane doesn't get out, so we're going to hit this deadline. And they hit the deadline, but they ended up putting out a plane that wasn't safe. Volkswagen, we have to have a zero emissions vehicle. Well, how do you get to the zero emissions vehicle? Well, they couldn't do it any other way other than cheating. So I think financial markets may put pressure on companies to hit numbers.
Also in Japan, there are a lot of the corporate scandals right now. And this year, the biggest scandal is one of the major broadcasters, Fuji TV. There was an incident of sexual violence between the employee and the famous celebrity. The third-party committee recognized that the extension of the professional duties by management failed to handle the issue after the incident. So people say that those legacy companies maintain the sexist and the hierarchical culture, and that's why it happened. But do you think that it's possible for traditional and legacy big corporation to incorporate ethics and integrity into their workplace, or like change the culture, change the company?
It's hard changing a culture with a company that's been around a long time and that's large, right? Because everybody's gotten used to certain norms, operating a certain way. In fact, you as a company attracted people based upon that those old norms and that old culture. So now suddenly saying, hey, everybody, everything's going to be different now. That's hard. I think in order to do it, you need a new leader. And you need someone who's willing to recognize that the old way wasn't working. In other words, you have to be open and intentional and talk about the old way and acknowledge that it doesn't work in order to completely make an about face. It's hard. I think it can be done. Let's also be clear that sexual harassment occurs in all sorts of corporate, not just something that's terribly hierarchical. Whenever anyone has any professional power over anyone else, there is the potential for sexual harassment issues. I think it's more likely to occur where you aren't intentional about integrity. So, I mean, what do I mean by that? At Airbnb, I actually went around as the chief ethics officer and had a meeting with all the other leaders in the company. In fact, I sat down in a leadership meeting and I said to everyone, here are 10 examples of leaders who have been caught in sexual harassment scandals, lost their job, hurt the brand. Obviously, we don't want anything like that here. So why don't we all make an agreement? None of us in this room will engage in any romantic relationship of any kind with any other employee in the company. Right? There was silence in the room for a minute. Right? And one person said, well, Rob, we're all married or in relationships anyway. And I said, well, from what I read, that doesn't stop people from acting this way. So I asked again, what do you want to do? And we went around the room, and each person said, I'm in. Okay? Now, by doing that, and then, by the way, we put it in our code of conduct that members of the executive team will not engage in any romantic relationships with anyone at the company. But we were intentional about it. And we made it instead of something that was never talked about, we actually made it an intentional discussion point. And we committed to each other that we wouldn't do it. So that if the promise was broken, at that point, you'd have to leave the organization. See, I think one of the problems that Google had was no one ever had a conversation like that, right? They never defined what do no evil means. They never had a discussion about romantic relationships. People just did it because there was no intentionality. So for me, I think part of this is having an intentional discussion about it, committing to each other about it, and then you're far less likely to have the problem.
I think what you pointed out led to the second part, steps to the right thing. So, yeah, intentionality is important, as you said. And so, for example, when we get hired in the new company, a lot of us going into the onboarding process, and we see the culture deck, like presentation thing, or video or lecture about ethics and culture. But once the process is done, we forget about them, like unless we talk about it, we are intentional about it. But so how do we make sure people think about it all the time? And like, how do we remind them of ethics and integrity?
Well, that's the key. You can't assume that. I'll tell you what a lot of companies do. A lot of companies have a code of conduct, right? Now, the law firm writes the code of conduct. The law firm sends it over, and then they send it out on email and say, okay, everybody, here's the code. Check a box. Say that you've read it. Send it back in. And then someone looks at it and says, oh, we've got everybody, so now our work is done. That does no good whatsoever, right? Because we know people don't even read it. You need to go a lot further than that. So, I mean, one of the things we did at Airbnb is we started with what you talked about. We had an orientation meeting for all new employees, but we didn't do it with video, and we didn't do it with a mid-level HR professional. Executives would go in and do the meetings themselves and talk about it. And the impression that made, I'll never forget, I would do most of them myself. And I had a woman come up to me who worked at a couple of other large tech companies in the Valley after the talk. She literally had tears coming in her eyes. And I said, oh no, what did I say? What did I do? And she said, Rob, I just was over at working at X big tech company. And my boss kept propositioning me, wouldn't stop. And I knew that if I reported it at the other company, nothing would happen. He said, but after hearing you come in and talk like this, I believe that you would do something about it. He said, but you have no idea what it means to me. I've never been at a company that talked about it like this. You have no idea what it means to me being in my position. So I think part of it is the way that you communicate it up front, the way that you set the tone right from the beginning. Do it with a leader, do it personally, and do it with authenticity and with clarity. Everyone in the company knew that if they had a problem, they could come to me and I wanted to know about it as the chief ethics officer. I think another thing that we did, in too many companies, integrity is something that's owned by legal. It's compliance, right? What I find is that compliance is important, but it doesn't touch people in their heart. In other words, they do it because they've got to do it, not because they feel like it's the right thing.
It's like the law.
Yeah. Yeah, it's legal. It's a legal thing.
Yeah, right.
So we've got to get away from that. So one of the things we did at Airbnb was we created this position of ethics advisors. It was a voluntary role, and what we did is we picked someone from each team in the company and each office. We brought, it was somebody usually who was senior enough to have good judgment, but not so senior that they were scary, right? And I told them, I got in the room with them and I said, look, our goal is to create an ethical culture and an ethical environment. But I also know, unfortunately, that people don't like to go talk to lawyers. Hate to admit it, but not everybody is running to the legal department in joy. They don't like to use hotlines because the hotlines make you feel like you're a whistleblower and it's scary. So what we're going to do is we're going to empower you to be the ethical representative on your team. So everybody on the team knew if you had a question, we wanted questions. If you had a problem, you could go to legal, you could go to me, you could go to HR, you could go use the hotline, or you could talk to the advisor on your team. Where do you think we got most of the questions and reports coming from in the next year? Through the ethics advisors. In other words, what we found is that people were far more likely to ask questions and raise their hand if it was someone who wasn't scary, who's someone who was right there on their team who was easily accessible, right? So that way we got away from this idea that ethics is something that's in the legal department way away, and we don't have to deal with it. We brought it to the team every day. And that person, for example, would occasionally, at team meetings, talk about an ethical problem that we saw at another company. But it was something that was always there because there was someone on your team who was actually responsible for it. We actually gave them little jackets that had Airbnb ethics on it. And we had even something, these nice metal water bottles. No one had ever heard of the idea of giving an award for asking an integrity question or raising an integrity issue. But we decided, why not? So the ethics advisors each had a stash of these nice metal water bottles. And the metal water bottles had the Airbnb logo and it had a little slogan on there called Integrity Belongs Here. That was the name of our program. If you ask a good question, you might get a water bottle. So what you started to see around the company were these integrity metal water bottles on cubes that people were using for their drinking water, right? Nice looking water bottle. Everybody would ask, where did you get it? Someone would explain why, right? And they became a little bit of a symbol that you would see every day of the integrity program. I had an incident where I was standing at my desk one day and someone came over to me. So they were a mid-level manager in the IT department. I said, hey, it's nice to meet you. Thanks for coming by to say hi. He said, Rob, I couldn't help but notice. When you left your desk area recently, you didn't turn your screen off. Your screen was left on for everyone to see. It's like, oh, I'm being called out for a security violation, right? And I'll be honest, my first reaction was, well, come on, give me a break. I mean, come on. There's nothing sensitive on the screen. We're in this badged building.
Don't make it a big deal.
I was gone for 5 or 10 minutes. Don't make a big deal about it. But fortunately, I thought all of those things to myself. And before I said anything, another good thought popped into my mind. And the thought that came to my mind was this. How great is it to work for a company where a mid-level manager is comfortable going up to a member of the executive team, the general counsel, and calling them out for doing something that wasn't according to the rules? rules. So I looked at him and I said, you know what? You're absolutely right. How embarrassing is this for me? Of all people in the company, I ought to be the one setting the good example. And I failed here. And he showed me how I could easily lock the screen before I walked away. And he walked away with a smile. I walked away thanking him. But that was a bigger opportunity. Next company meeting, several thousand people there, video and people in the present. I go up to the microphone and I tell everyone in the company the story of my security violation. And I gave this mid-level manager one of those metal water bottles in front of the entire company. Everyone gave him a huge round of applause. 3 years later, he sent me an email and said, Rob, I just want you to know that was my proudest moment as an employee, 6 years of working at the company, right? So you can do little things like the water bottles, like the ethics advisors and the like, to kind of keep the message going so that you're not just hearing it once and then it disappears. We did one more thing I talked about in the book, and that is videos. You know, I think we've all been at places where they make you watch these compliance videos, right? They're an hour long. Everyone doesn't like it. You have to check a box. I told my kids about it. I have kids that are were in college, and they said, "Rob, Dad, you're making people watch videos for an hour? We don't watch any video unless it's 3 minutes long or less, right?" And I laughed, and then I thought, I work at a company with a lot of young people. I'll bet you all the young people of the company feel the same way. And then I said, why can't we get our point across in 3 minutes? So what we started to do is we started making ethics integrity videos, but they were 3 minutes long or less. They were very unprofessional. They were shot on my telephone video camera. They were unprofessionally acted. I would appear in these things, for example, where the scripts weren't very good. But we would record them and we would send them out. And we didn't require anyone to watch them. So it wasn't a compliance thing. It was, here's a video that we made, watch it if you want. Within 6 months, 70% of the company were voluntarily watching an integrity video every month. Why? Because members of leadership would do little guest appearances. They were funny, they were authentic, and it was less than 3 minutes. And people appreciated the fact that, hey, wait a minute, executives must care about this sort of thing because they're actually taking the time to do these little videos, and they would see their friends in the videos, say, oh, look, there's John, he's in the video with the executive here. And they would come up with ideas for videos. So the videos became part of the culture at the company. Again, your point was so good. You've got to keep the message going in little ways, right? And it was with a video, it's with the ethics advisors. You have to keep it going, otherwise people forget.
When I think about ethics advisor on each team, does everyone want to do it voluntarily? Like usually you should do this and do this, like in addition to your everyday job tasks. It feels like a burden for each people.
Worry. That was exactly my worry. I was thinking, am I going to be able to get anybody to do this?
How did that work?
You know, I think the reason that it worked was first of all, everyone in the company knew that ethics and integrity were important to us. And I think we appealed to their values, to their heart. In other words, you know, doing the right thing is something that's really important to us as a company. We'd like for you to be part of that. I actually pointed out, look, this is a great thing for your career. Wouldn't it be great on your resume to be able to point out that you were selected as one of the few people who was an ethics advisor? We trusted you and we trusted your integrity so much that we gave you this position. Because who doesn't want to hire someone that is recognized as having high integrity? So I think people realize, first of all, it's good for my career. Secondly, it speaks to my values and what the kind of place that I want to work. I get to be a voice in that now. I get to be a part of it. And it wasn't a lot of extra work, but I think the fact that it was related to something like integrity, I think really spoke to people. And after the first year, we asked if there were more volunteers. We had more volunteers than we could take. We had more people interested in doing the job than we had positions available for it. So it became actually a little bit of an honor.
That's important. To make it an honor to do that.
Yeah.
We brought up so many examples in the book, and we can learn from that. But I think as technology or business model or like the world evolves, it's hard to apply those lessons into the environment we've never been before. So how do we apply those lessons to those situations?
Yeah, the world's changed so much since I first, when I got out of school.
It's been a few years
even
since you published the book.
The original version of the book came out. When my dad, for example, when my dad went to work, you worked at a company for 30 years, you get a gold watch and retired there, right? You had no way of communicating an issue that you saw. In fact, you wouldn't want to because you'd be risking your entire career. And what were you going to go to the one newspaper in town or the one TV station? It wasn't realistic. In today's world, the environment's changed so much. We are connected in ways that we could never have dreamed when I was growing up. And every employee now, they don't expect to stay 30 years. They might stay 3. And they have so many options to share what they see. There are no secrets anymore. Employees now will print out documents and take them to the government. They will write blog posts and stories about it. So we've had to adjust ethically, I think, to this new world where there are no secrets. And I think you're right. And I think we're going to have to make even more adjustments because the world is changing so fast now. The stakes get higher and higher. The faster things move, the more powerful our tools become, the more challenges we have. We didn't have to, when I started in Silicon Valley, I worked at eBay. And eBay had a number of challenges in this regard. But even I couldn't have dreamed of what YouTube meant and what YouTube could do, or what X or Twitter, the ability to instantly communicate with so many people all around the world. The challenges just keep coming and they keep coming. And again, if you're not intentional about thinking, you got to think through these things. Right. You've got to recognize and admit that they're challenges and affirmatively do something about it.
eBay was a platform company, and Airbnb was too, and there are a lot of platform companies that those business models evolve and take over the world right now. You wrote about how difficult it is to operate those businesses and with the maintained ethics and integrity. Could you tell us how platform companies should be operating?
Well, platform company means that you are just providing a base on which other people come on and they put on products or they put on comments. So you may have your own idea of what right and wrong is, but you're dealing with tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people all around the world from different backgrounds and different cultures, and they're taking over your platform. Right. It's got your brand and your logo on it, but it's their content. And that creates some really interesting ethical challenges that you've got to be ready for. In the early days of eBay, I had to confront questions like, should we sell guns on the website? Should we sell prescription drugs? We had someone try to sell a kidney. They wanted to put an extra kidney on there because there might be kidney donors. We had one situation where someone went to get communion with the Pope. Okay? And they took the wafer from the Pope, but instead of putting the wafer in their mouth at communion, they put the wafer in their pocket, right? And then they came on and put it on eBay. And so I remember I got the call. So we've gotten some complaints about this. Should we allow it? And to illustrate how little one person knows about this sort of thing, I'm not Catholic. I said, well, the Pope gave it to him. It's legal. Wants to sell it, he should sell it. 2 days go by. I get a call from my CEO. Rob, why has the Catholic Church announced a worldwide boycott of eBay?
Oh my God.
That was what I said. And it was because once consecrated by the Pope, it's considered the body of Christ. So we were selling the body of Christ. So needless to say, we rethought things. But it illustrates the challenge of trying to figure out, one person can't know everything, can't figure all these things out. And so what I did after that little mistake, I created a team of people, different backgrounds, different cultures, different people from around the world. And we all sat down as a group together whenever there were controversial items, and then we talked about the ethical consequences of it. Even then, though, there were challenges. We had an issue with memorabilia from Nazi Germany. German World War II uniforms, for example, would be on the site. And we made the decision that you can't ignore what happened in the war, and it would be okay to put the items on the site. But we had a board member who strongly disagreed and threatened to resign if those items were sold. So everybody's got different opinions about what integrity means, and you're constantly being challenged. With eBay, it was items. With YouTube, it is videos. Same thing with Twitter and X. What sort of things are appropriate? They're good businesses in many respects, but they create ethical challenges that you have to put a lot of thought into.
But how do we deal with all of that? Because the interesting thing is, I wanted to ask you about this, but there's a second-hand selling platform called Mercari in Japan.
Yes.
They operate a business in the U.S. too, but they're also struggling with the criticism about from the general public about how they handle items posted by resellers, like who trying to sell popular goods for very high prices right now. And people say Mercari should ban those resellers, but they don't, unless those posts violate the community guidelines. So they're like they want to balance as a platform, but they seem struggling to.
Yes.
I
feel for them. I feel for their struggle. It is hard.
What would you do?
Who creates community guidelines, for example? They say, well, it doesn't violate our community guidelines. Well, who decided those community guidelines?
They have
what are your principles?
They have a panel thing, but they don't like take aggressive.
Yeah, I think you have to get more aggressive. I mean, in my mind, what eBay did, ultimately eBay over the years learned that you need to be more aggressive. It's your brand. You're the one that's going to suffer when there are problems that occur. I think early on we were reluctant to get involved. We wanted to say, well, if it's legal, we don't want to get involved in it. The world doesn't let you do that, right? That's compliance. You've got to go beyond that to a notion of integrity and doing what's right. And so I think eBay over the years has evolved. And again, everyone can have an opinion. There may be differences of opinion about things. But I think you've got to own your platform. I think you have to take responsibility for what's on there. And if it violates your sense of what really is right, then you got to get it off. You have to have a vision.
Yeah. So the platform have to act
on
what they think is right.
Yeah. I think so. I don't think there's any rule that says that, well, anybody who wants to put anything on there, go ahead and do it. Because ultimately that reflects poorly on you, hurts your brand, and ultimately hurts your business. So in my mind, you as a platform have to have your North Star. You have to decide now you get to define what integrity means for your platform, but you've got to have values and you've got to puzzle through it.
This is a difficult thing to think about, right?
We were reluctant in the early days of eBay. I know the founder of eBay, Piero Migliore, was reluctant to get too involved in those sorts of things. But I think over time we realized that we simply have to do it. It's a part of running a business. And if you want to run a business, you make tough decisions.
Right. Great. So going into the final part, new responsibility in the AI era. So we've seen lots of AI companies growing so fast, like you saw at the Airbnb and other businesses in the tech industry. So we need a kind of integrity for the safe and responsible AI development. That's what everyone's talking about right now. But it costs a lot of money to make AI models, run AI models, and so they need to make money at the same time. So how do you think AI companies ensure intentional integrity?
Well, I think the first thing is they have to make it a goal. I think an AI company has to decide we want to operate with integrity. I mean, there may be ones that don't. They may say, you know what, we are simply working to design the best model, and where we have confidence that building the best model will ultimately be good for the world, and we're just going to put it out there and see what happens. I don't think that. I think that's a little bit like a marketplace, opening up the entire marketplace and say, put on whatever you want, we'll not deal with it. I think that companies have to take responsibility for what's on their site or what comes out of their models. So I think the first step for an AI company is take stock of the integrity issues that your business raises. I mean, so you start with the very first one, and that is sustainability. The amount of electricity that is used in running these AI models is enormous and has tremendous consequences for the environment. I think that's your responsibility as the AI company. What are you going to do about it? And again, I think some of them are stepping up with enormous projects in solar fields, for example. They're creating energy that can offset the tremendous energy use that their platforms are creating. But that's just one example. Another, I think, is the bias of these AI models, right? What thought have you put into whether or how biased these models are, so you can create models that aren't biased against women or aren't biased against people of a sexual, of a particular sexual preference or race and the like. And then what's your responsibility around the creation of things that may be extremely dangerous for the world? AI can be used for obviously terrible purposes, and people can use it that way. So what responsibility do the AI companies have to cleanse the model or create versions of the model that can't be used for bad? And then to what extent is an AI company responsible for the efficiencies, the human efficiencies that may result? So I've certainly read stories where people, where companies said, well, we don't need 25 engineers anymore, we only need 2 because of AI. Well, that's 23 people without a job. Is that the responsibility of the AI company? Or is that more of a general responsibility of government to figure out what boundaries to put around job protection? Or is it the job of government to protect? Should we just let it fall where it may? It has some interesting consequences for what society looks like in 10 years.
AI companies have the position like general counsel or chief legal officer, all sorts of like legal positions from the very beginning. So I think it seems like they want to say, oh, we are handling this, we are dealing with this. But at the same time, they take like aggressive strategy, like to make money and to make people use more, they accelerate the engagement of users. So how do you see those?
Just because you got a lawyer doesn't mean you're ethical. In fact, in a lot of places in the world, actually the lawyer is seen as the start of all the problems. I think that we need to put pressure on these companies the other way. In other words, I'm sure a number of them feel pressure to grow as fast as they can, make as much money as they can, get their valuations up as fast as they can. What checks are there around this that go the other way? I know that in Europe, for example, Europe has done a lot of work on the EU, on AI protections. There was some work in the United States, and I think under the current administration, that's been set aside. But I think, honestly, there may be an important role that government may have to play here. Unfortunately, I think the government usually is a lot slower to act than business. Business races ahead. A number of problems are created, and then government comes in later and tries to straighten things out. We may need government to move a little faster because AI is moving so quickly. And work cooperatively with the AI companies so that everyone recognizes, look, it's in all of our interest and it's in society's interest to set some boundaries around what you're doing. And I think, I've certainly gotten some indication. The OpenAI, for example, right from the beginning was they created their product with the express desire to be a nonprofit and to operate in a way that was highly ethical.
Right.
So I think what the government might find is that even some AI companies are a little nervous about where this might go, and they might be willing to sit down and work on some restrictions, some guidelines that are good for all of us.
Before we wrap up, I want to point out about investors' role in those contexts. And you point about the government, but the investors keep pouring the money into those AI startups. And you wrote about WeWork in the book, and you point out about SoftBank, this Masayoshi-san. He told WeWork and
be crazy.
Be crazy.
Be crazy. Gave a young man an enormous sum of money, told him to be crazy, and then was surprised by what happened.
And SoftBank is one of the biggest investors in OpenAI right now.
Yes.
So how do you see the investors' role?
Well, I think investors play an important role, particularly, a lot of these startups are run by very young entrepreneurs who look to the investors for guidance. And in fact, the investors are often the only control that exists over a company in the early stage before they go public. And I think investors need to be thinking a little bit long term. I know some entrepreneurs that feel an enormous amount of pressure from investors to get the valuation up, and to get the money up. And I think in those cases, they may be a little short-sighted. Getting a valuation up this year may not be what's in the best interest of the company in the long run. Mm-hmm. An intelligent investor might sit down with the entrepreneur and work with them on a longer view, and may even encourage some more ethical behavior, understanding that in the long run that's going to be a better investment for them. But I think investors play an important role because early on in particular, they're the only ones that the entrepreneur has to listen to.
Great stories and great opinions and great views, and thank you very much for coming today. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Okay. 本日もご視聴いただきありがとうございます。ぜひチャンネル登録と高評価、そしてクロスディグの公式 X のフォローもお願いいたします。本日はロバート・チェスナットさんをお迎えしてお送りしました。So, thank you again very much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.